I forgot to mention, I once impersonated Donnie Yen at a Chinese New Year assembly at school. I got asked to be Ip Man. And so I should try to insert, if I can dig it out, I'll put the picture in now. But
Ooh,
yes,
okay.
your favorite deep dive movie review critic was once Ip Man himself.
Wow. Well, I can't wait.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit.
Welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. This episode, we are talking Donnie Yen's Sakra.
Hey, but you know the drill. Before we head out to talk about Sakra, if you haven't already subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, it'd be a great favor to us if you went ahead and did that. Just hit that subscribe button, and while you're there, tap that little bell next to it. That way you're notified every time we upload a new video. And just as a reminder, as we always like to say, Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers. We're going to be talking Sakra pretty deep here. Maybe some spoilers. You've been warned. James?
Okay, so yes, Sakra, new martial arts wuxia epic from Donnie Yen, who not only stars, but he directs and produces and seems to have been heavily involved in the process from the beginning. It's an adaptation of Demi-Gods and Semi-Devils, a Jin Yong novel from the 1960s that has been adapted numerous times over the years and was originally serialized in Ming Pao, one of the local Hong Kong newspapers. So it's a story that supposedly we should be familiar with, or certainly wuxia manhua fans should have some kind of idea about it. Essentially, it stars Donnie Yen as Kuo Feng, who is the leader of the beggar sect, which is sort of a clan of bandits. But really the film is the story of him being ousted from that position and sort of run out of town when it comes to like that he might be a Khitan, he might be part of the opposition. It's during the warring states period of Chinese history, when there are various different sort of tribes and armies and clans all vying for control of the country. He's framed for the murder of sort of the second in command and accused point blank outright by the man's wife of his murder, which we pretty much know not to be not true. His parents are murdered and he's framed for that. And then, a lot of things happen and the story pretty much unfolds with his encounters of the various people that tracking down the people that he believes to be responsible. So, Steve, where do we go with this one?
I gotta say right from the start, James. Obviously, we watched this in a screening with a lot of local Hong Kong folk who were clapping, were hooting at the beginning and end. So there's a great love for Donnie Yen and for this style of film in our hometown here of Hong Kong. Having said that, I'm not a particularly big wuxia fan. I love a lot of Chinese film, obviously, a lot of Hong Kong film. I've never really completely resonated with the wuxia aesthetic and the storylines and the way the plots tend to unfold and the dynamics involved with some of the supernatural elements within the stories. So my criticism here is going to be I'm going to try to honor the film and honor the people who obviously love this kind of expression of film, while having to say up front that I struggled with it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I think I agree with you. I certainly struggled with some of the story beats and with the narrative, and I want to get onto that in a minute. As far as sort of the wuxia element of it goes, there's a lot of it about, and if you watch a lot of sort of Chinese cinema, a lot of Hong Kong cinema, there's a lot of it, and obviously that means that there are going to be varying degrees of quality. It's a wide open field. Donnie Yen is, fairly safe pair of hands, but he is getting on. He's one of these sort of tragic heroes of Hong Kong cinema that he only got his time to shine, if you like, late on, when arguably physically he was past his prime. And there are some people who will argue, oh no, he's still great, he's still got it. Yeah, sure, he does. But look at the Ip Man films, which were 2008 right up to like sort of just 2020 or 2019, and he's basically in his 50s doing these movies. And yes, the character was that age, but it's the kind of sort of franchise success you want to have in your 30s, really, particularly as a sort of a martial artist, when it's so physically demanding. And it's great that he finally has got to this stage in his career where he can just make passion projects like this. He can get stuff greenlit on his name alone, and he's finally getting, roles in Hollywood movies as well. Star Wars, Triple X. He's going to be in the new John Wick. What have you? And that's all great. But it is tinged with this sort of melancholic air that it's like, if only this had happened 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I think the knock-on effect of that is that in the action sequences that you see in Sakra and in some of the work he's doing recently, that they use an abundance of wire work and CG augmentation and whip pans and fast cutting that they wouldn't have had as a crutch, essentially, that they wouldn't have had to rely on 10, 20 years ago. That Donnie and his co-stars, because there is a kind of knock-on effect. If he can't do it, he's not going to let the people opposite him do it, if you know what I mean.
Right.
He's got to maintain his status as top dog. So the knock-on effect is that the action isn't quite as kinetic and dynamic, or as visceral as it would have been a while ago. I think a lot of it, to be fair, in this movie is quite fun. A lot of the action is quite fun, but I think it is a little bit more sort of magical, supernatural, has elements of sort of Buddhist magic woven into it that just help blur the edges a little bit, that I don't think we would have seen had the film been made some years earlier.
Well, I'm glad you bring up the wire work, because I think I mentioned to you, as soon as the film ended, I found myself a little irritated by the huge use of wire work in this film. And I said, there should be a moratorium on these types of films where for 10 years, no wire work. Because while I was watching it, I was thinking how much I grew up on Enter the Dragon. I probably watched Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon more times than I can imagine. And I was thinking, just in the moment when they're on the island and Bruce Lee is going toe-to-toe with the one guy, and there's no wild things just spinning and people flying, it's just him toe-to-toe with one guy. He hits him one time and the guy drops. And I got more impact in that one scene than I got in 15 minutes of people running around houses, running around, getting smashed through walls with... And I'll bring up another issue that I have, and this is not unique to Sakra, but I could name just about any Marvel movie, is when there's no consequences in fighting. People get smashed through walls, and they get up, and in this case, Donnie Yen, there's not a hair out of place, there's no blood anywhere, there's nothing been broken. He could get knocked through a wall 15 times, but somehow on the 16th time, suddenly there's blood. Suddenly something's happened on the 16th time that didn't happen on the first 15 times. And there's no I said consequence for actions, but there's no feeling like I'm in a fight with this person, that my body is being torn, that I am feeling the pummels of someone who is an expert fighter. It becomes like a little arcade game, and you lose. There's no stake left in it. There's no empathy. I don't feel anything for these people. Whereas in a movie like, say, Enter the Dragon, I don't want to compare everything to a 1970s film, but you could have a little bit of the sensational in some of the fight sequences, but they were still grounded in some measure of reality. When people got hit, they went down and then they struggled to get up again, because it's rooted in the physics and the gravity and the human body. And I understand being wuxia, this is magical and supernatural, but there still needs to be some kind of umbilical to reality if we, the viewer, are going to have some kind of stake in the outcome of the story.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I'm just very concerned that we're going to get some kind of slap back, because the original novel is about sort of Buddhist cosmology and the magical elemental side of it, and I know that we understand that, and so the fact that they are kind of superhuman to varying degrees, sure, we get that, But I think what we're both talking about is just the execution of that on screen. And there is a way to, as you saw with a lot of the old sort of Choi Hart movies and what have you, with The Wire work back in the 80s, there's a way of doing that and keeping it physical and keeping it grounded.
It's grounded, yes.
Yeah, even when they're flying over rooftops and spiraling, somersaulting a dozen times and what have you. There's a way of doing that and having it still feel athletic, having it still feel, like there are stakes, like you say.
Yes.
Whereas there are other ways of doing it where it just feels completely like it's pixels flying through the air, and there is no weight to it. There are no stakes to it. There is no physical pain, for want of a better word.
No, there's none. You don't get that feeling of pain in this movie. And it's not that I'm against wire work, but the best metaphor I could use is like in a food, it's a garnish. It's meant to accentuate. It's meant to enhance the aesthetic, but you don't replace the main meal, the main base of what you're trying to film with the garnish. And that's when you overuse the garnish, you're left with something that's not as filling. It's not as appetizing. It doesn't fill me as a film goer the way that a very good fight sequence could be done. And then using some of these quick takes and using some of these this wire work for accentuating the fight rather than making it the main, I don't know, is impetus the word, the main body of the fight.
Yeah, no, I get you completely. Yeah. And I think it's very telling that we've immediately started talking about these elements of the films and have very quickly started referring to other movies and trying to sort of talk about it in broad terms. Because at the end of the day, and I think the biggest problem with this film is it's quite generic and it's not very special in that regard. I don't think it stands out alongside so many of these other wuxia movies, so many of these other sort of period martial arts films that we have had in recent years, even just within Donnie Yen's own canon of work. And I think that's ultimately the problem, is you come away going, well, that's just another one of those. And it's one where, as we have said, not to sort of belabor the point, where his physical abilities are less on display than they have been in the past, just because they're being shrouded in too much sort of just busyness, on-screen busyness, which does involve characters like being thrown around, thrown through walls, and tables breaking left, right, and center, and all the rest of it. But yeah, there never feels to be any sort of consequences, any stakes, or any danger involved in any of it. I mean, moving into other areas of the film, I mean, in terms of the plot, and I think this is where I found my biggest problem with the film, was just kind of following the narrative, because it only adapts a section of the novel. The novel has kind of like 3 major stories, and although characters from the other 2 stories are woven in to this part of the story, it's really just Kuao Feng's story that is covered here, and really only part of that. I mean, put it on the table now. I've not read the book. I'm actually just going straight off the Wikipedia synopsis of the book. But reading through that, you're like, well, it's really only this chunk. It's really only sort of half of that part of that story within the novel that the film seems to cover. And I wonder whether that's where some of this sort of disorientation comes from that I felt during the film, is that they're trying to acknowledge and allude sort of little Easter eggs, perhaps of nodding winks to other characters from the book that more better versed audience members than me would be able to pick up on and would be able to follow more easily than I could. But I frequently found myself lost, particularly when it's raised about halfway through the film that there's a 30-year time jump somehow, somewhere. And it also becomes apparent that Donnie Yen is playing more than one character in this movie. That he's playing Kuao Feng, but he's also playing his own father. In this movie. And for me, at least, it wasn't always 100% clear who he was playing and where we were in the timeline.
No, you're right that some kind of familiarity with the source material would help huge in this because there's nothing is spoon fed right from the get-go. You remember there's an opening fight scene, and then when Donnie Yen's character goes to his beggar clan to kind of reunite with them, they instantly are accusing him of everything. You've murdered this person, you're a traitor, you're secret this, and it's like, whoa, where did that come from? This is going from 0 to 100. We just dove into the deep end of the pool. I haven't been given any explanatory notes on this. And yeah, you think, okay, it's a movie, maybe this will come out later, but it's not always made completely clear. These dots are always not connected. I have to say, though, when he gets there to the beggar clan and he's getting challenged and it looks like he's not going to be the leader anymore, I don't know about you, but I instantly went to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and Paul Newman being challenged for the leadership of the Hole in the Wall gang. And I thought, Donnie Yen's going to kick some guy in the nuts. They're going to do him, you know.
No, not yet. Not until me and Harvey get the rules straightened out.
Rules? In a knife fight? No rules. What?
Well, if there ain't gonna be any rules, let's get the fight started. Someone count 1, 2, 3, go.
1, 2, 3, go.
You know, I guess it's my Western lens that I'm reading this through, but I instantly was seeing the parallels in that moment. And he's going to challenge somebody, and this is going to be like a little Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Obviously, they didn't go that way, but that was what was going through my head.
Yeah, no, that's great. Because I love how much sort of crossover there is and overlap there is between wuxia films like this, Jideke samurai movies, and westerns.
Absolutely. You know, yes.
And there was even musical cues early on in the film which
were Western,
which were real sort of spaghetti Western Morricone-esque kind of guitar strumming. And I was like, hang on a minute, you know.
I almost leaned over to you at the beginning and go, are we watching a spaghetti Western? I almost did that. Yeah.
And I think it's kind of deliberate. I think because obviously Donnie Yen, we know that Donnie Yen is very well versed in, global cinema. He's not been working in a bubble, in a goldfish bowl his entire career or anything like that. If he's doing something like that, it's very much a deliberate just nod to, hey, to make, if only to make the material a little bit more accessible and just be like, hey, see, look, this is the vibe I'm going for. Similarly, in that opening scene, where he's fighting in the inn, and they're using chopsticks as weapons and sort of throwing them, and they're stabbing each other and pinning characters down with them. That's a very blatant nod to a very classic early wuxia film called Dragon Inn by King Hu, which in turn was in itself was influenced by sort of Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns, and then went on to influence the likes of Tarantino and people like that. So in the first 15 minutes of the movie, I was like, oh, this is going to be really interesting, because this is showing a lot of really rich influence from Eastern, classics of this genre, as well as sort of a Western vibe as well. I was really sort of invested in, okay, where's he going to go with this? Where's he going to take it? But then unfortunately, it all seemed to sort of slip away from him as he pulled in more and more characters. There are more and more sort of young female characters, and more sort of slightly stoic, slightly malevolent, male men in positions of power who wanted his authority or his leadership or his clan or his land or whatever it was. And after a while, you just start to feel a little bit sort of discombobulated, and you're like, well, who, where, why? And then when they threw in this sort of time aspect of it as well, I was kind of like, okay, I had to, at one point, I really had to kind of put my hand up and go, okay, I'm a bit lost now. I'm not entirely sure where this is all going.
Yeah, I remember at one point you saying this whole time thing is, it's can we ask a question here? Like, how does this connect? So I was thinking very similarly. Is at first I was getting kind of excited where this was going to kind of break into some territory that, even though as I admitted that I'm not a big wuxia fan, I thought, oh, if this is going to be kind of a Western in 11th century China, I can do this. I'll enjoy this. But what I found happening as the story progressed was it was just a little too paint by numbers for me. It was just a little too standard. It was endless fight scenes, which I won't retread what we've said earlier, but it just got to the point where I was looking at my watch going, okay, that's a really long fight scene where nothing really happened. And
there was no outcome. There was no outcome. It didn't change anything.
No, you just feel like this is a wuxia exhibition, and I'm here to watch them spin around and dance and fly and levitate and flick, random pieces of wood and have them do outrageous things. But after a while, if there's not enough story underpinning this, I find myself again looking at my watch.
I mean, there's another character, and we've got to talk about the female characters in the film, because particularly Azu, played by Chen Yuqi, who is introduced as a kind of thief who has this Mission Impossible gimmick where she wears masks. And she reminded me of, what's the character in Game of Thrones called that trains Arya Stark up to be...
it's Maisie.
Maisie Williams' character, Arya Stark, is trained up by a guy called like the Faceless Assassin or something like that.
Right.
Who does that? Who has that gimmick as well, where he can just like wear the mask of other people and pass himself off as other people. And obviously, it's always been a big trope in Mission Impossible, right back to the TV show.
Yeah.
And Azu does that originally. she passes herself off as one of the sort of young priests so that she can steal this thing, which she then frames Donnie Yen for, and she gets injured in the process, and then he feels duty bound to go and heal her, falls in love with her in the process, and they end up sort of shacking up together for a large portion of the film. He's like just driving her around in his cart, trying to help her recuperate.
Giving her his energy,
his chi or whatever it is, in order to help her.
I'm gonna try that with I'm gonna try that with my wife, baby. I'm just gonna give you my
good luck with that. Yeah. Good luck with that. But then there's a couple more times where she uses this gimmick. She passes herself off as one of the other female characters in order to get some information, and then rather bizarrely towards the end, she passes herself off as her own father. And Donnie Yen ends up killing her by mistake. And so you're kind of like, okay, well, that kind of backfired somewhat. And it's a bizarre, for a character that is seemingly so important and is equipped with these tools that she can arguably manipulate the story in any way she wants to, or in any way that the narrative needs her to. So you've got this character who... is taking up such a huge sort of portion of the story, and is equipped with these tools where she can essentially, change the course of events at any time just by like whipping up. And I don't know how she makes these masks or where they come from or anything like that, but she can make them really well. And she seemingly has the tools at her disposal and has the masks at her disposal at any time.
The best thing in this movie is not to ask too many questions about anything.
No, absolutely not. But then my point is that at the end of the day, you've got this character like that who is in such a great sort of influential point, and then seemingly nothing really comes of it other than ultimately, she causes her own death, really. And I just found that it found sort of somewhat frustrating, really. That she's sort of the love interest, but she's also sort of has agency of her own, but then she's kind of bedridden for most of the movie, and then dies, and you're like, okay.
I thought what was ironic was the chi energy that Donnie Yen had used to save her ultimately is what kills her, because when he kills her thinking she's the dad, and and obviously she's trying to heal the grudge, trying to heal the rift between them. It's 30 years ago. Can we put this behind us? We've moved on. Nope, I have to kill you. Boom. And again, it goes back to, if it had been a regular fight, he would have just used his chi energy. The person would have exploded through the back of the boat. Then he would have come back at him. But apparently this time, it was the killing blow. And I'm thinking, well, why don't you just do the killing blow all the time? but you know,
Yeah, no, it's inconsistencies like that
Yeah.
that ultimately prove quite frustrating. And also, you know, when you've got a cast like this, you know, in a movie that has so many characters and so many moving parts and seemingly wants to prioritize action at the expense of anything else, it's very frustrating when you have an actress like Wai Ying-hong, like Kara Hui, who plays the mother of the two girls. You know, when they get, you know, the wife of this great adversary to Donnie Yen, who is one of the great female martial artists. You know, she's right up there with kind of Michelle Yeoh and what have you. And she doesn't do any fighting at all. Her character doesn't do anything. Her character just sort of stands around and sort of says, "Oh, you've been a bad husband and you've got lots of illegitimate children." You know, drops a few exposition bombs so that Azu can sort of eavesdrop and overhear that, that she's another love child.
Yeah.
But then other than that, she doesn't do anything. Because I thought when she turns up, it's like, oh, great. Well, at least we're going to have Donnie Yen fight her and she's going to be great.
Yeah.
Never happens. Very, very frustrating. But what was nice is that when we do meet her, she's also with Cya Liu, who plays the little sister, RZ, who's the kind of sort of tomboyish little sister with the two swords, who really wants to kind of kill her father because she realizes what a sort of a piece of trash he is, and then she ends up teaming up with Donnie Yen, and off they sort of ride into the sunset where they're going to have many more adventures together, albeit in a platonic way, I understand, because she's considerably younger, even though she's actually, the actress playing her is actually older than the actress playing the other sister, but that's just movies for you. Because it was kind of because I knew Cya Liu was in the movie. I didn't know what character she was playing. And we're around like sort of getting on for an hour and a half into the movie, and I'm like, she hasn't showed up. I'm looking at all these other female characters. I'm like, that's not her. That's not her. And then she shows up with like half an hour left. And once she appears, she kind of, you know, jumps around a bit. You know, she is a pretty action-packed role. You know, she gets to fight a lot, and then she ends up sort of making it right to the end and giving the impression that she's going to be an important character in the rest of the story. But it did suggest that to me that this cut that we are watching was kind of just cobbled together from a lot of kind of loose ends, and maybe they had they wanted originally to cover more of the story, right? But ended up not being able to tie up enough of the ends, so they were like, well, let's focus on this big bit in the middle that we can kind of fashion into a 3-act structure, kind of, sort of. Although I do remember saying to you at the end of the screening that it has no structure. You don't know, you never feel like you know how far into the movie you are. Because it doesn't really have a kind of traditional structure. But then it leaves you with just all of these little kind of loose ends at the end involving you know, Donnie Yen as the father, and the father of one of the villains shows up, and it all suddenly gets very, very confusing, and they introduce a whole bunch of new characters right at the end, and you get this real sense that, you know, it's to be continued, and they want to continue this story, but I'm not sure that's going to happen.
Well, like you, I'm not familiar with the source material other than what I read in Wikipedia, but I did read through it, and you realize this is a big sprawling story with a lot of different narratives that are going on, and like you said, that's one of the difficulties this movie has in translating it to film, is it becomes a small sprawling story with difficult to gather what's going on at times, and it's definitely setting itself up for a sequel. So, you know, for me, it would have been better served if we had been, and I'm not one who needs spoon-fed information all the time, but because this is such a sprawling thread, there's threads everywhere, there needs to be some exposition to help us all come on the same page. Now, maybe some listeners out there are going, oh, two Western guys, you're not familiar with this story. You know, we're all very familiar with it, and maybe many of the people in that theater were familiar with it. But as someone who's new to the material, and I think any kind of film that, even if it's based on very popular source material, has to become accessible for the new viewer. You know, if I'm going, you can watch Lord of the Rings and see Peter Jackson being able to, what's the word?
Service the fans.
Thank you.
But
Perfect.
also Yeah.
Yes, service to the fans while also making the film accessible to newbies who are just walking into the theater for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you get that impression that that was the intention here. I mean, we should point out that Donnie Yen showed up to our screening. You know, he showed up at the end. We certainly hadn't been told that was.
No, we were
happen.
surprised. It was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
Insert photos here, right?
But we were sort of about to get up and go, and then they were like, oh, you know, and then Yenzi Danny's here, and he shows up and talks about the movie very passionately, albeit mostly in Cantonese, for about sort of 20 minutes. But what was abundantly clear is that he said that this was his new reworking, reinterpretation of the classic story. This was not him trying to remake a classic. This was him trying to reinvent a classic or to retool it. Yeah. This was definitely a reinterpretation that would lean into his sensibilities and his tastes and his skills. And so I think that what he's trying to say there is that, you know, he wants to bring it to a new audience rather than feel enslaved to, you know, existing fans of the franchise. And I feel that what you end up with on screen at the end is something that actually people unfamiliar with the material are going to struggle to be able to put together all of these very sort of enigmatic snippets and introductions of new characters right at the end that leave your head swirling, just kind of wait, what is going on? But not in an excited, anticipatory kind of way. Not like, oh my God, I can't wait for all of this to be explained, but just a kind of,
Yeah.
At least that's how I ended up.
Two things about Donnie Yen dropping in at the end. It was a pleasant surprise that I came away with. Is one, he acknowledged the 5 of us or so Westerners in the crowd, and actually explained a little bit of it in English for our benefit, which was great. The second is his passion for the film. It's reminded me how much a film like this you have to put into it, and how much it takes, and how much work. And although this movie didn't hit all the little dots for me, it didn't hit all the buttons for me, I appreciated elements of it. And I was, again, when somebody's passionate about a project like that, even when I wasn't understanding all of his Cantonese, you could feel the passion he has. This is a passion project for Donnie Yen. And so I really hope that the obvious sequel, which there'll be, maybe will tighten some of that narrative and give something that's a little bit more accessible for the new one, for the new viewer to the material.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an unmitigated disaster by any stretch.
No.
I mean, you know, it has, like we said, a lot of action in it. Much of it works. It's very kinetic. It's very lively, and you know, as standalone pieces, a lot of it is quite effective. And I think fans of the kind of heightened magical side of the wuxia genre will, you know, it will resonate with them. Production design was at a higher level than I was anticipating. You know, when I kind of heard that this is planning to get like a sort of straight to streaming release in mainland China, I immediately kind of associated that with a lot of the straight to streaming 1 hour quickies on like iQIYI and other streaming platforms, which are, let's say, tossed off very cheaply, very quickly in order to kind of cash in. And they're similar quality to something like sort of the Asylum movies or something like that you might get in the West. This is not one of those by any stretch. You know, there's a lot more money. It's produced by Wong Jing. There's a lot more money on the table, and it's up there on screen. You know, the production design is great. The sets I thought were really
they were very good,
to be honest. It's just a shame that just narratively it becomes unwieldy, and I think that that is an unfortunate byproduct of the fact that you're trying to, as you said, contain or bottle a huge sprawling classic of Chinese literature into 2 hours.
No, absolutely. The visual aesthetic, some of the countryside scenes were like to die for. It was gorgeous, almost like Banshees of Inisherin, where you just think, oh, what a beautiful, beautiful place. And some of the scenes of Donnie Yen riding across the plains on a horse in full gallop, it's very it's exhilarating. And it was nice for him to be able to share a little bit in English about his riding sequences. It's always nice to get a little commentary behind some anecdote behind the scenes.
It was funny when he came out with that, actually, because by the time the film was over, I sort of, one of the main takeaways I had in my head was, well, he sure does love to ride horses. There are so many sort of extended sequences, particularly towards the end, and it does,
he's really
struggle. It does struggle to end this movie.
Yeah.
It's one of those movies that kind of, you think it's ending 5 times.
Yeah.
It fades to black and you're like, oh, okay,
this is like Return of the King. This is
okay. So there's a bit of that, and I did come away thinking, well, he sure does love to ride horses. And then he tells us this anecdote, first in Cantonese and then in English, which was a little bit frustrating because of all the anecdotes he was telling us in Cantonese, that was the one I understood. And then he chooses to translate that one, and I was like, yeah, I got that one. But he talks about how really that he didn't have much prep time for the horse riding sequences, right. And he hasn't ridden horses for a long time, and so he really actually had to kind of he met the horse 5 minutes before he was due to ride it, which I don't imagine is very sensible, and then had to do all these sequences when he's like drinking from a bottle while riding, and he nearly came off the horse a number of times. So that was it was kind of an interesting little sort of coincidence like that.
Well, James, as we draw this to a close, as always, we need an instrument of measurement. How are we going to grade Sakra, Donnie Yen's new Wuxia blockbuster?
Oh, well, how about face masks?
Face masks, yeah. Discarded face masks. There would always be discarded beyond the side
they were
of
always
the boat.
Left as a telltale sign on the
discarded.
Yeah.
Yeah. But James, how many discarded face masks are you going to give it?
Okay, I mean, because this is a movie that it is, so it is a bit of a kind of rambling mess, essentially, at the end of the day. You feel that Donnie Yen's passion in the project, and you realize that's probably the only reason that it got made. This is obviously a story that he loves, and he wanted to tell his version of it. And he was able to bring a good cast together and get plenty of money. And as I said, it's all up there on screen. The action looks great. The set pieces are strong. But you get lost watching the movie fairly early on, or certainly, by the end, you're pretty worn out, or certainly I was. You're pretty worn out and you're pretty disoriented. And so you're left unsatisfied. I think it's fair to say. So as much of it that it does right, I think ultimately it's weighed down by the things that it does wrong, or the things that it just fails to do right, really, rather than doing wrong. And that's a shame. I like to see Donnie Yen do well. As I said, I was a fan of Cya Liu and Kara Wei, and it's a shame that they're not in it as much as I would like them to be. But there's some fun stuff, and Wuxia diehards may have plenty to enjoy here. So I'm going to end up giving it 2 duplicitous, discarded face masks out of 5.
Okay, James, I'm tacking along the same lines with you. For all the reasons I've said previously, I just appreciate that, what Donnie Yen has been to the city and in Hong Kong cinema and China cinema. And as I mentioned, this is a real passion project for him. And there was aesthetics, there was martial arts that I did enjoy. And there was elements that were quite entertaining in this film. However, for everything you've just said, I was lost at times. There was elements where I was kind of confused, but if I have my biggest gripe is the overuse of wire work, of camera tricks at the expense of just good old-fashioned martial arts. Give me a fight that's a little bit shorter, a little more grounded in reality, where consequences are occurring. You feel the crackles. You see the person struggling to get up because they've just been hit like a ton of bricks. Let me feel like I'm part of this. As I mentioned, there's probably Wuxia advocates and fans out there that are saying, but that's not how this operates. That's not the world in which this operates. And I'll concede that. But all I can do is grade it based on my perception. I'm also going to give it 2 stars out of 5.
You mean 2 discarded face masks out of 5?
Sorry, yes, 2 discarded face masks. Well, that's James and I's thought on Donnie Yen's Sakra. What are your thoughts? Are you a Wuxia fan? Are you somebody who's watched a lot of Donnie Yen films? What is your perspective? Obviously, we've given our thoughts that could be a little controversial. We'd love to hear what you have to say about it. Be respectful, but we would love to engage in conversation with you about it. James?
Absolutely. What are some of your favorite wuxia films? What are some of your favorite Donnie Yen films? We always want more recommendations, and yeah, like you say, to engage our audience in healthy debate about Hong Kong cinema, because obviously, you know, we are immersed in it. We both live in the city and have done for many years, but we are very well aware that there are experts out there who know a great deal more about it than we do. So let us know in the comments. And we look forward to hearing from you.
I forgot to mention, I once impersonated Donnie Yen at a Chinese New Year assembly at school. I got asked to be Ip Man. And so I should try to insert, if I can dig it out, I'll put the picture in now.
Ooh,
but yes,
okay.
your favorite deep dive movie review critic was once Ip Man himself.
Wow. Well, I can't wait.
Until next episode, bye everybody.
Bye.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.